Hello and welcome back to the Unbearable Reds. I'm your host Carl, and today we're going to be having a look back at what could have been, what we should have had, and lament as we've seen our dreams built up by these players and then crumble to dust. We're going to be talking about Liverpool's 5 biggest underachieving players since 2000. Number 5, Joe Allen. What can you say about Joe Allen, the Welsh Xavi himself? A player so devoid of any real impact at the club. Like myself, you probably forgot that he even existed until I started doing this video. So, Joe Allen was signed by Mr. Showed great character himself, Brendan Rodgers, in August of 2012. This was after he'd been to the Olympics with Team GB, put in a few good performances there, and after his breakout season in the Premier League the year before, under Rodgers at Swansea. He was signed for £15 million, and when he was brought in, he was compared to Xavi, obviously not in quality, but in style of play, being a midfield metronome, a playmaker, somebody to keep hold of the ball, move her on, just Xavi. What Xavi? That was what Joe Allen was supposed to be. And with signing this young, silky playmaker, it kind of gave us hope that we were going to be able to have that player in the midfield, which would then free Gerrard up to attack opposition defences and absolutely terrorise the league. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Gerrard wasn't unshackled. If anything, he was more shackled by Joe Allen, because what we actually got was nothing like a Welsh Xavi at all. Rodgers, who worked with Joe Allen for a number of years at Swansea, signed him, noted that he was a advanced playmaker, and promptly played him as a number 6 despite us having Lucas in the team. Yeah, it baffled me at the time, still baffles me now, and Joe Allen was completely unsuited for this role. He was 7 stone wet, small, technically gifted player, and he spent most of his time in the role getting thrown around like an empty trackie by opposition strikers and more robust opposition midfielders. This actually resulted in the following season in Steven Gerrard, the player that Joe Allen was supposed to unshackle, being played in the DM role himself, which he excelled at. He had his best season for a number of years, being able to do the more robust side of being a DM with the hard tackles and going shoulder to shoulder with the attackers, and then getting the ball and spraying those famous 50-yard passes forward to Suarez, to Sterling, to Sturridge. Yeah, it was one of Gerrard's better seasons, and that was as a result of Joe Allen not being good enough to do the job, which he wasn't actually brought in to do, but was made to do by the manager who brought him in knowing he couldn't do it. See where I'm going with this? Yeah. He did have a bit of a renaissance after Rodgers left and Klopp was brought in, when Klopp saw the player, oh, you know what, you're obviously an attacking playmaker, and played him in that role a number of times. He had a couple of good games for Liverpool, but then ultimately at the end of that season he was let go to Stoke, and yeah, to be forgotten about. Sorry Joe, you had a lot of promise, you didn't do anything that you were supposed to do at the club. Not really your fault because Rodgers didn't use you properly, but you're still underachieved, unfortunately, and that's why you're my number 5 pick, because you should have been a much better player than you were. If you were played in the position that you should have been played in, I think that you would have gone on to be a good player, but it didn't happen, and now you're just a footnote. One of a long line of underachieving midfielders that were signed during that period, and that's Joe Allen. And number 4 is Mario Balotelli. Allow me to paint the picture for you of what happened. It's August, it's 2014, the World Cup's just happened. Liverpool star man Luis Suarez has continued his cannibalistic rampage across professional football by taking a bite out of Giorgio Chiellini during the World Cup, once again resulting in another suspension for the player. For Liverpool, this was the final straw after the racial abuse of Patrice Evra, after biting Branislav Ivanovic. It's time to cut our losses because the player was dragging the club's reputation through the mud. So he left for Barcelona. We had £65 million in return from him, and things weren't looking great. We now had the Luis Suarez size hole in the squad. The season prior, we had actually just challenged the league, narrowly missing out on the final day of the season, and Luis Suarez was a big part of that. So he's now gone. His boots need to be filled. All we have left at the moment, at this point, is Daniel Sturridge, who's just starting to become quite injury prone, and we have Fabio Borini, who arguably could have been in this list. He's not, because he was terrible. But yeah, anyway, that's all we had. What's the answer? What's the answer to this? We need a hero. We need a brilliant, world-class player to come in, fill the boots of Luis Suarez, and help us kick on and make progress on the huge leap that we'd taken the previous season. And we turn to Mario Balotelli. What could go wrong? Literally everything went wrong with this transfer. Now the price we got Balotelli for, £16 million, considered a bit of a coup at the time, because prior to playing for Liverpool, he'd obviously had a good time at Man City, won a league title there, scored goals, got good performances, and then he fell out with the Man City establishment, moved on to AC Milan, continued to score goals there, and now we're getting him in for 16 million. Seems great. His first game for Liverpool, I still remember it now, Tottenham at White Hart Lane. A game that we, if I remember rightly, we drew. I can't remember the result, but I remember the game. I think we drew 1-1, and he looked brilliant in that game when he came on. Terrorised their defence, nearly scored from 40 yards. He didn't score, but he nearly scored, and it looked like, oh, do you know what? Give him a couple more games, and this guy, he could really do bits for Liverpool. Got a good reputation. He had a great performance at the European Championships and the prior World Cup. Give him time, and it'll come, and it didn't. He only played 16 games last season for Liverpool, scoring 1 goal, and it seems at Liverpool we got all the bad aspects of Mario Balotelli, the laziness, the sullenly walking around the pitch. I mean, for the vast majority of his games, a shirt on a broom would have done the same job, and it wouldn't have been taken home an eye-watering 100k a week for the privilege. And Mario Balotelli, he only spent 1 season at the club, and after that he was loaned straight back to AC Milan, and he never really recaptured the Super Mario aspect of the player. He then just became a bang average forward, and unfortunately his first bang average season happened after we bought him. Jurgen Klopp comes into the club. I think he must have met him once and just thought, nah. And I can understand why. Jurgen Klopp is a manager that likes players with commitment, with drive, with intensity, and Mario Balotelli is none of those things. Klopp wouldn't stand for it, and he moved on to Nice, and he cut out a decent career for himself since. Did well for Nice, done well for Marseille. I think he's at Brescia now, so it's not like his career's over. He's just so happened that it was when he signed for Liverpool that everything went wrong. When you factor in that he was playing alongside the likes of Ricky Lambert and Fabio Borini, because Daniel Sturridge was out injured for the majority of the season. So those 3 were our strike force that we brought in to replace Luis Suarez. No wonder everything went wrong that year. So yeah, Mario Balotelli, waste of money. Although you've got this far into the video, so I'd just like to take this time to maybe speak about hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button if you're enjoying what you're seeing. You know, we are a new channel, we are still growing. Any support that you can give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. And now number 3 is John Flanagan, the Scouse Cafu, Flanny Alves. I don't have a third nickname. He broke through into the collective consciousness of the Liverpool fan base in 2011. A local born right back coming through the academy, burst onto the scene in a game against Man City, which we went on to win 3-0 with Andy Carroll scoring a brace, his first 2 goals for the club. And Flanagan played the entire game, and he played it in a manner of somebody with an entire career's worth of experience behind him. He looked phenomenal. His performance was lauded by Kenny Dalglish, and why not? Because as I mentioned, the performance he put in was fantastic, and it all looked rosy. It looked as though we had the right back position locked down and sought for the next 10 years. Turns out that wouldn't be the case until a few years later when we had Trent Alexander-Arnold burst onto the scene, so happy ending in that regard, but not for John Flanagan, because he never actually reached his potential. What happened to John Flanagan? How did a player showing so much promise, who burst onto the scene in such a memorable way, end up languishing in irrelevance in Scotland? Now, 2 things. First of all, the curse of many a young player is the injury problems. Now, he's been dogged by injuries throughout his career, spent many times on the sideline, came back, putting up performances, out injured again. Not really his fault, but still it is something that has hampered his development. And secondly, more importantly in my view, is his off the field conduct, which we'll go into in more detail in a bit. Having an injury a couple of seasons, I mentioned earlier that he'd come back in fits and flourishes of really good games, and one of his best bodies of work came during the 13-14 season when he got the name the Scouse Cafu, and he was given that by Cafu himself after a great performance against Spurs in which he scored, and he absolutely dominated the right hand side, and it was much akin to the heights he hit during his breakout season in the games against Man City and a few others. it looked as though John Flanagan was back. But once again, injuries took hold and off the field stuff started getting in the way. There was rumours that at the start of that season why he wasn't playing is because he had missed training in the summer to go to Creamfields and take part in some recreational activities, shall we say. And also there was the issue a bit later on where he physically attacked his, at the time, girlfriend in a nightclub surrounded by people. The absolute scumbag. After all this, it was hard to recover his reputation with the fan base, with the club at large, and with the footballing world. Hasn't really recovered, and he has been thrown a lifeline recently. He's now playing in Scotland for Rangers. DVG taking him up there. He hasn't played much, but haven't been out for so long and having the issues that he's had, it may take him a little while to get to establish himself up there, but you never know. If anyone can get the best out of him, maybe Gerrard can. Ultimately, as a Liverpool player, massive underachiever. And number 2 on my list is Andy Carroll. 31st of January 2011. Every Liverpool fan knows where they were that night of that transfer window. Fernando Torres leaves the club, £50 million for our rivals Chelsea. Club record transfer at the time for us. Our returning hero Kenny Dalglish has a problem to solve. He's got £50 million. He's got a huge gap up front now that Torres had left, and he needs it filled. So what did he do? He goes out and he buys 2 players. Number 1 being Luis Suarez for £22 million and Andy Carroll for £35 million. At the time, with us just receiving the big FIFA Torres and the excitement of the the January transfer deadline day, everyone got swept away. Good young player at the time, had a great season in the Championship for Newcastle, seemed to have kicked on in the Premier League, and now he's signed for Liverpool. Issue being, when we signed him, he was injured. Not the end of the world, happens all the time. He was injured though because he'd fell off a stool at a bar in Newcastle after having too many Jaeger bombs. That's a true story, and it's a reflection of the attitude of Andy Carroll in regards to being a professional footballer. Now, he didn't play for Liverpool for a number of weeks. He actually made his debut coming off the bench against Man United in a game that we won 3-1, the Dirk Kuyt game. He scored the first goal by Luis Suarez, taking on 6 players, kicking the ball at the goal. It's about to go in and Dirk Kuyt hits it on the line. Perfect, absolute poacher's goal. Go you, Dirk Kuyt. So Andy Carroll comes on in that game. That's his first game for Liverpool, and he has a number of performances after that where he's come on. He's not really starting many games at this point in time, obviously because he's come back from injury and he's getting to gel with the team and stuff. And then he has his big breakout game for Liverpool is the 3-0 win against Man City, the same one that previously mentioned John Flanagan started in. He scores a brace and everything's looking great. Finally Andy Carroll's arrived at Liverpool Football Club, and he didn't score again for the rest of the season. Much like John Flanagan, he's a player who's had injury problems, and that was no different at Liverpool. He was always picking up niggly injuries. He'd never really gelled with the team. He just didn't really fit the philosophy of what we were going for, and Andy Carroll was a panic buy. And do you know what? The club gets slated for the signing, but at the end of the day, we also signed Luis Suarez at the same time. In my mental gymnastics, if we have to have Andy Carroll to have had Luis Suarez, then so be it. But regardless of that, Andy Carroll massively underachieved when you consider the potential that he had coming into the club and the money that we paid for him and what we got in return. He only had 1 full season at the club, or 2 full seasons at the club, and then he was loaned out by Brendan Rodgers to West Ham, where he ultimately stayed. We got 17 million back for him, and he's now back at Newcastle, so he's gone full circle as a player, and nothing ever really changed for him. Injured, and then when he came back, he wouldn't perform, and then he'd be injured again, and ultimately, not only an underachiever for Liverpool, an underachiever for every club he's been at, and just generally not fulfilled any potential he could have had as a player. That's why Andy Carroll is number 2 on my list. The number 1 underachieving player at Liverpool is Daniel Sturridge, and I want to caveat this by saying I think Sturridge is a fantastic player who, when he was on the pitch and playing in a series of games, he was phenomenal, but that is just the issue. He was never fit enough, long enough. Sturridge is often overshadowed by Luis Suarez because both of them were at their peak at the same time, and Luis Suarez was just a better player than Daniel Sturridge. He scored 50 goals in 114 games for Liverpool, which isn't a bad scoring record, but most of those goals came in the first 2 seasons of his career, and the rest of them were spread out over the last 5. For me, when Daniel Sturridge was fit and firing, he was something to behold, and I'd argue, not even arguably, I'd fight me in the comments section if you don't agree, but for me, Daniel Sturridge is probably the most lethal out-and-out finisher we've had since the likes of Fowler and Owen. He was just that good. Such a pure poacher, and yeah, it's just unfortunate that the injuries got to him and he wasn't able to just continue playing the way he could. We signed Daniel Sturridge in January 2013 for 12 million from Chelsea, and we signed him in the same window that we signed Felipe Coutinho, and they were the two big signings of the Brendan Rodgers era. In that first half season that he had, he scored 10 goals in 11 starts, which, you know, great, and then he kicked on in the next season. At the start of the next season, Luis Suarez was banned for biting Branislav Ivanovic, and Sturridge carried the line for us. He scored 21 goals while Suarez was out injured, and then luckily enough, Suarez comes back and he hits the ground running and he gets 30 goals in the rest of the season, and Sturridge's form, he gets injured and then his form drops off a bit, but he'd done enough. He'd done enough in my book to be considered one of the better strike partners for Luis Suarez. Luis Suarez and Daniel Sturridge was probably the most lethal strike partnership we've had in a long time. I go so far as to say I'd rather have Sturridge and Suarez at that time than I would say like Salah and Mane now, because they were lethal goal machines, and yeah, so are Salah and Mane. Maybe I wouldn't, I don't know. Maybe that's a video for another time. So yeah, in his first season and a half for Liverpool, he scored 32 goals. And then after that, he only went on to score another 24 in the next 5 years. That was purely because he wasn't getting game time, because he was so injured so much of the time. And Daniel Sturridge is probably the only player in this list that I genuinely feel sorry for. He was just naturally injury prone. That's genetics. There's nothing he can do about that. He was a model professional. When he played, and all right, he had games where he didn't look like he was bothered, but every player does that. And I just kind of feel like if he hadn't been so injury prone, and if he just had more luck, we'd be talking about Daniel Sturridge alongside the likes of Luis Suarez, Fernando Torres, Robbie Fowler, Michael Owen. He'd be up there, and it's only because of his brittle knees that we aren't. And ultimately, out of all of these stories that we've talked about today, Sturridge's story has the happy ending, because he left Liverpool Football Club a hero. In his final season, he played important games. He got a goal against Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League, a game we ultimately went on to win at Anfield. He was a key contributor to that Liverpool team that won the Champions League. He got his place on that bus, he got his medal, and he left a hero. And that's more that can be said for the rest of the players on this list. So that's my list for the 5 biggest underachievers at Liverpool Football Club. Is there anybody I've forgotten? Do you disagree that any of the players I've mentioned actually underachieved? Do you agree and you want to give me a compliment? That'd be greatly appreciated.